My name is Namshkai Inyuma, Capture Thunderpipe in Blackfoot. And my English name is Jennifer Thompson, and I'm the president here of Edami Dodatsiop, the Confluence Historic Site and Parkland. Welcome back to the final stretch of the Confluence Symposium. We saved the best for last. I'm so excited about our final plenary, all about contextualizing historical icons. So we'll hear two presentations, so please hold your questions for the end. We will give time for questions, and so just if you need to write them down, just remember them, and we'll take all of them at the end. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kirk Niergarth. Dr. Niergarth teaches history as an associate professor at Mount Royal University. He is the author of The Dignity of Every Human Being, New Brunswick Artists and Canadian Culture Between the Great Depression and the Cold War, and is the co-editor of the journal Labor, Le Travail. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Niergarth.
Well, hello everyone, and I have to start by expressing so much gratitude to the organizers of this event. It's been a fantastic few days, and I just am very humbled and grateful for all the knowledge that I've received and the conversations that we've started here, and I trust that those conversations will continue, and as we build relations here at the Confluence in Mohkinstsis, and consider the history of this place. I am going to be contextualizing one historical icon who I believe should be much better known in Canadian art history circles, and thanks to a film made on Calgary cable television the year before he died, I can let Gerald Tailfeathers introduce himself.
My childhood name was or Big Walking Away, and this usually are names given to young Indian boys at an early age by after some relative, and then I was given another name, Itspapwaka, or Walking on Top, and this was given to me by my grandfather, Crazy Crow. But later years, I went by my family name, and this is the name that I signed my artwork with, and it's just simply Tailfeathers.
He could really draw. And I think Gerald Tailfeathers is an important Kainai artist, and we can contextualize him within millennia of a Blackfoot image-making tradition, from writing on stone through the ledger drawings. We heard in an earlier presentation about the images on the at Okotoks on the rocks. But what I want to speak to him with the themes of this conference is within the context of some of his connection with the Canadian colonial state and with settler art institutions. And I do have many thanks to give for people who helped me understand the work of Tailfeathers a little better. I want to single out my colleagues Gabriel Weaselhead, Alfred Youngman, and I got to speak to Hugh and Pauline Dempsey before their passing about this artist, and Heather Caverhill also. I want to focus, I think, for the themes of this conference on two quotations of Gerald Tailfeathers that he repeated versions of in many interviews he did with the press. So he said in one article in 1966, "I've had a lot of encouragement. It seems I've had someone come along at each stage of my life to help me." But then in the same article, he says that his career was a struggle. And 3 years later, he's more explicit. He's asked about succeeding in the art world as a Blackfoot person, and he replied, well, things are a bit different today, but in my day, I had one heck of a time. It was a hard trail. And the pattern of these two non-contradictory statements, encouragement and a hard trail, I think we can see even in his early childhood. Gerald started residential school at 7 years of age, and after 2 unhappy years, he rebelled. He's quoted as saying, "I'll run away," after he's brought back from running away, and if I have to stay here any longer, and every time you bring me back, I'll run away again. Now, he had a family that was able, that had a relationship with the administrator of the school, Ken Middleton, and they moved closer to the school, and there was a special dispensation that the Tailfeathers boys could become day students. And not very long after that, he began to get recognition for his artistic talent. And this was an artistic family. His uncle, Percy Plainwoman, was a skilled painter, and his mother, Esto Tailfeathers, was involved in making and promoting Blackfoot handicrafts. His older brother, Harvey, was so talented that when in 1935, some sketches that he did came to the attention of this German-American artist, Winold Rice, who was running a summer school for artists in Montana, that the artist sent an invitation for this young man to come to the school. But Harvey that year developed an eye condition that he couldn't go. And Gerald, only 10 years old, convinces his family to allow him to go instead. And Gerald so astonished Rice with his talent that he offered to take him to New York to continue training him. But his family, understandably, didn't allow this 10-year-old to go off with this artist. But he did go back for the next 3 summers. And in 1937, his mother goes with him, and they meet this British sculptress named Claire Sheridan, who then goes back to Cardston with them and stays in the family home, which you can see down at the bottom corner, and writes a book about it. And in this book, she talks about Gerald's artwork. She calls him a genius. And she reproduces this image that he did and says, this is a portrait of Big Bull. Alone he did it. There was no teacher who touched it. I gave him $5 for it. It's the first picture he ever sold and not likely to be the last. And somehow the story of his tremendous talent came to the attention of the local Indian agent, John Pugh, and he sends, in November 1937, 2 portraits that Tailfeathers executed, and with the request that there be a dispensation of money to provide this boy with art supplies. And the department agrees. They do get art supplies 4 months later, which by the standard of Ottawa, I think is, lightning speed. He begins to get some attention locally, but that year, the special dispensation that allowed the Tailfeathers boys to be day students, that ended. And while he was at school, his mother died. He had conflict with the staff, but he did have some access to art supplies. So he had some support, but it was a hard trail. Those portraits that they sent to Ottawa, they float around for a while. They end up in the National Gallery of Canada to get an assessment by the director. He writes that they're remarkable and extraordinarily accomplished for anyone so young. But then the compliment gets a little backhanded. It would be interesting to see some more of his work done less directly under instruction, so that we could see whether the boy possessed imagination and originality as well as technical ability. Now, the Indian agent writes, when he gets this letter, saying, he did these on his own, he's really, really, really talented. But I guess I just want to say, for the sake of saying it, that 86 years later, the National Gallery of Canada has yet to find any of the works by Gerald Tailfeathers. that it is seen fit to add to its collection. When his residential schooling ends in 1941, he wins a province-wide contest. There's a winner from Northern Alberta and from Southern Alberta for tuition at the Banff Summer School of Fine Arts. And he's the first Indigenous student to go there. He studied under W.J. Phillips, and there he also met a man named John Laurie, who was a high school teacher in Calgary, who becomes a lifelong friend. And these two used their influence, I think, to get Tailfeathers a scholarship to the Provincial Institute of Technology and Art in Calgary, beginning in the fall of 1941. He's the second person from Kainai, after Mike Eaglespeaker, to leave the reserve for professional post-secondary training. Tailfeathers boarded with Laurie while he was at school. His tuition was covered by a scholarship, but making ends meet was still a challenge. He painted Christmas cards in watercolor. He did 100 his first year in the city, which he sold for 25 cents a piece, and a remarkable 500 in his second year. He describes working until he just was too tired to continue. And he worked his summers in a bakery. I also spent time on haying and threshing crews in order to have money to survive while he was going to school. A graduate in 1944, he's offered a position doing display work at the downtown Hudson's Bay store, not too far from where we are here. And during the war, the government regulations meant that you had to get a permit for like manpower for doing the job. And when his permit comes for this job he's supposed to get at Hudson Bay store, it's to permit him to work as a laborer at the Hudson's Bay East Calgary warehouse. John Laurie thought this had something to do with Gerald's race and was able to make a few phone calls, and Tailfeathers gets the permit to do the display job. And he works at the Hudson's Bay store until 1948, occasionally exhibiting his own art before he then transfers to the Edmonton store. And in Edmonton, he meets Irene Goodstriker, and who he'd gone to residential school with, and they get married, and they move back to Calgary in 1951. And he's working here as a draftsman for a company called Structural Engineering, and then he works in similar jobs for Gulf Oil and Supertest Petroleum. And until 1959, his own art was to some degree a sideline. But he persisted with it, and then in the later 1930s, he began to receive some encouragement and commissions in connection to friends who were working with the Glenbow, Alberta Foundation. So Hugh Dempsey, who you'll see here, met Tailfeathers in Edmonton. His wife, Pauline Gladstone, attended residential school with Gerald and Irene, and the two couples were close friends for decades, particularly after the Dempseys moved to Calgary in 1956, when Hugh lands a job as an archivist with the Glenbow, Alberta Foundation. By this time, John Laurie, who you see over here, is also working for Glenbow on a contract basis. And both of these men commissioned Tailfeathers to do artistic work, to do ethnographic and botanical drawings through Laurie, and to do book plates and donation certificates through Dempsey. And somehow the art department at Glenbow learns of the fine art work that Gerald continued to do. And so in 56 and 57, 4 paintings by Tailfeathers are purchased by the foundation for an average of about $50 a piece. The first of these was Blood Camps. That's become one of the paintings of Tailfeathers that's most frequently reproduced. It was likely based on a scene that he himself had witnessed in his youth. It seems connected to a photograph of Claire Sheridan, that woman who wrote the book, her car at the site of the Sundance in 1937. But I think that the stylistic decisions here, the abbreviated horse's head, the perspective, are things that have made it for modernist curators something attractive to reproduce. And certainly that was connected to Tailfeathers' creativity and imagination, but the impulses to stylize his images were things that he would later resist, and that he rarely indulged in when painting scenes from Blackfoot history. Other kinds of recognition were following in these years. In 1957, James Gladstone, Pauline's father, was involved in commissioning Tailfeathers' work, Evening Shadows, on the far side, to be presented to the Prime Minister, John Diefenbaker, when he visited the Calgary Stampede. The following year, one of his paintings appeared on the cover of Western Horseman. And so with a growing reputation, it's not surprising that one branch of the federal government, the National Film Board, in 1959 dispatched a photographer to take pictures of Gerald Tailfeathers and his work. And by April, some of these photographs appear as far afield as in this clipping from a Hungarian's women's magazine. They've got a literal translation in the Glembo files, which makes almost no sense. So I don't know what it says in Hungarian. But sadly, this was not the only representative of the federal government to visit the Tailfeathers' home in early 1959. And the second one, from Indian Affairs, would change the course of the artist's life. With 3 young children and a successful career, Tailfeathers, he was renting a home in Okotoks, and he qualified for a federal program to build a home under the terms of the National Housing Act. But he didn't have the $1,500 for a down payment, and since, he tells a reporter, I did not think there was much point in an Indian applying to a bank or a mortgage company. He applied to the Kainai Band Council for a loan, and it gets approved, but dispersing the loan rests on approval from Ottawa, from the Department of Indian Affairs, and an officer is dispatched to investigate the Tailfeathers case, arrives at his house, learns that Tailfeathers has been self-supporting off reserve for 18 years, and tells him that he's eligible for enfranchisement. You won't have to borrow the money. You can receive your share of band funds and make a down payment for your house. Well, Tailfeathers regarded this suggestion of enfranchisement and the possibility that this could be forced upon him and the potential loss of his status as a threat against what he called his birthright. He never wanted to be in a position where he would have to ask permission to return to what he called his real home. So he gave his employer 2 months' notice and set in motion plans that would see him move back to the reserve and own and operate a gas station there. While the threat of enfranchisement and what Tailfeathers has called, what he called patriotism to my people, were the direct motivation of the family's move back to the reserve, he acknowledged that he always planned to eventually return from what he called the outside to where he felt he could devote more time to his art. If I had not been interested in art, I would have never come back. An artist requires the quiet rural life, he said. After his move south, Tailfeathers was clearly devoting significant time to drawing and painting. In December of 1959, he mounts a one-person show in Lethbridge, and the following month, what I want to talk a little bit about further today, he undertakes a major commission from Glembo. In January 1960, an executive of Eric Harvey's, George Crawford, is among those who are given $1,000 to add something to the Glembo Foundation's collection. And at a meeting with Hugh Dempsey, Crawford expresses his intention to commission a dozen paintings of historic sites and events from Alberta history. And Dempsey recommends his friend Gerald Tailfeathers. When he writes to Tailfeathers about this, the list of subjects, which you can see here, suggested is remarkable in view of the paintings that Tailfeathers would ultimately produce. All of these are images of settler history. And Tailfeathers, in this certificate for the Glembo that he'd done earlier, had tackled some of these in miniature form that in this certificate he'd completed in 1957. But the evidence suggests that he was unwilling to accept this commission as proposed. And within weeks, Dempsey and Tailfeathers met with Crawford and completed arrangements for Gerald to do a series of paintings on Indian life. And before the month was out, Dempsey was visiting Gerald Tailfeathers' family on reserve, and he wrote in his diary that Tailfeathers was already hard at work on the series. And he completed the series with incredible speed. He delivered the last of the 12 commissioned paintings on the 1st of May, 1960. The paintings offered the foundation, I think, a very impressive return on the expense of $1,000, even in those days. Crawford was very pleased. A year later, in April 1961, Crawford is CC'd on a memo that Dempsey writes to this newly installed director of art, Moncrief Williamson, explaining how it had been agreed that Tailfeathers would do some more paintings, this quotation, more paintings for us as an expansion of the previous series. Tailfeathers suggests 8 possible subjects. He agrees to produce 6 more paintings for an additional $500. And what he wanted to cover was all aspects of Blackfoot life which were not covered in the previous set. Moncrief Williamson canceled this series after 3 paintings. And the disrespect he showed Tailfeathers both as a person and an artist in their exchange created a rift between the artist and the institution that took a long time to reconcile. The denouement came when Tailfeathers submitted this painting, Drinking Party, which Williamson privately called cartoonish. The idea that Tailfeathers had made a conscious stylistic decision to represent the subjects becoming fundamentally unlike themselves under the influence of alcohol was apparently lost on Williamson. And no works by Tailfeathers were added to the collection for the next 7 years, long after Williamson's career there had ended. But Tailfeathers found other supporters for his work. By the mid-1960s, he was regularly exhibiting in both Canada and the United States, and his paintings were often sold. Oh, I'm going to go back. I don't want to put A.Y. Jackson up there yet. They were often sold before he completed them. He told a reporter in 1969 that he aimed to contribute something to Canada and not just to my own people. We might get a hint of what he had in mind in response when asked a few years earlier about whether he had favored integration for Indigenous people in Canada. And for the questioner, that clearly means something very akin to assimilation into settler society. But Tailfeathers turns the question on its head. He says, integration has to be both ways. It's also a matter of integrating the whites. To appreciate Tailfeathers' accomplishment, we might juxtapose the series he completed with the Glenbow with earlier settler renditions of the same territory, be it the modernist Canadian landscape tradition, in which the same year that Claire Sheridan was living with the Tailfeathers, A.Y. Jackson was rendering Blood Indian Reserve with no blood Indians, or the so-called Western artists such as Charlie Russell, with whom Tailfeathers' work is often linked. Sometimes he gets called the Indian Charlie Russell. But Tailfeathers' paintings are most obviously distinguishable from the cowboy painters in their narrative. Tailfeathers is not a Wild West, where Russell's paintings record anecdotes of high drama. The bucking horse rides through the campfire yet again. Tailfeathers' aim is to record a way of life, including its most quotidian details. Tailfeathers' 1960-61 series is a work of Blackfoot social history. Tailfeathers' paintings indicate change over time, but they travel no great distance in space. They are all depictions of how life was lived by Blackfoot people on Blackfoot territory. Here is how food was obtained and how it was prepared. Here are scenes of ritual and sacred spaces. Here is community defense. Here are social conflicts. And in Drinking Party, here is a social problem. In this work, or with the depictions of the Hudson's Bay blanket in Procession of the Holy Woman, which you saw a moment ago, colonial trade and its effects are suggested, but the colonialists themselves and their structures and their settlements are entirely absent. If these images speak in the language of Russell and Remington, they do so to rebut their narratives of an expanding westward frontier and supplant them with a portrait of an established homeland. Darcy Ricard, a reporter for the Lethbridge Herald who wrote often about Tailfeathers, he wrote a feature in 1971 which involved a visit to the family home. And Ricard wrote, "I looked at the colors of the landscape and I thought of Tailfeathers' paintings and how pure and clean his colors are. He doesn't try too hard to be great. He has restraint." And reading Tailfeathers' restraint can be a challenge in the 21st century. The curator of a recent Alberta Foundation of the Arts traveling exhibition wrote, "Tailfeathers' work exhibit a romantic and nostalgic vision of the Blood people's life in the 19th century. I think this is a misreading. Tailfeathers belongs not to the romantic tradition of Remington and Russell, but to what I would call the documentary tradition. For Canadian poet Dorothy Livesey, the documentary poem was a conscious attempt to create a dialectic between the objective facts and the subjective feelings of the poet. Tailfeathers' paintings, based on meticulous research, historical photographs, oral history, his own lived experience, they certainly depict objective facts, and their angle of vision suggests their creator's subjective feelings. For example, one of my favorite stories is the Lethbridge Historical Society commissions Tailfeathers in 1969 to paint a scene of Fort Whoop-Up in the early days. And he paints a family, a Blackfoot family, riding beside what looks like a wagon trail, descending a hill, presumably to where Fort Whoop-Up is, which is entirely obscured by the topography. Tailfeathers painted Fort Whoop-Up with no fort, a kind of mirrored of A.Y. Jackson's painting of the Blood Indian Reserve with no Blood Indians. Indigenous adaptation to colonialism are features of Tailfeathers' history painting, but the colonizers themselves and their structures are not. Tailfeathers' art practice was an act of resistance. As Francis Kay writes, resistance is not only confrontation, it's also the deceptively simple act of living one's own life on Indigenous terms, negotiating the material world of colonization without internalizing the corrosive racism of the colonizer. If we were to put Tailfeathers' visual narrative at the center of our art history, we would need to tell a different story about what it means to live in Blackfoot territory. Remembering Tailfeathers' wish that he might ultimately make a contribution to Canada, it might be to offer to settlers something like what Thompson Highway had in mind when he wrote, "I suppose we Indian people writing for the stage ultimately want to be heard, so the dream life of this particular people, this particular landscape, can achieve some degree of exposure among general audiences. They just may learn, we keep hoping, something new and something terribly relevant and beautiful about that particular landscape that they too have become inhabitants of." And I want to thank Gerald Tailfeathers for helping us teach something about this beautiful landscape that we're a part of today. Thank you for your time.
Wow, thank you so much. I didn't know any of that about Gerald Tailfeathers, and I could have listened to that all day. So thank you so much for that. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alexandra Giancarlo, Treffery Deerfoot, and one of my favorite people, Audrey Weasel Traveler, who looks fabulous today. I mean, you all do. Dr. Giancarlo is a settler scholar and an assistant professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology at the University of Calgary, where she applies her broad social sciences training to sociocultural studies of sport and physical activity. Treffery Deerfoot is a well-known powwow dancer, storyteller, and ceremonialist who has traveled internationally sharing Blackfoot culture. He is a member of the Sacred Horn Society and a holder and caregiver of a sacred beaver bundle. Last but not least, Audrey Weasel Traveler is a storyteller, educator from the Kainai Nation on Blackfoot territory here. As a retired administrator within the education and job readiness field, Audrey teaches for First Nation colleges, does consulting work for education authorities, and continues her involvement in cultural and ceremony activities within the Treaty 7 area. It's so important that we have a teacher again here on the stage, all of you. So again, thank you so much for being educators. Please help me in welcoming them to the stage.
Oki Nixo Quakes, which means hello, my relatives. My name is Alexandra, and as my introduction aptly stated, I'm a non-Indigenous scholar. I work as an assistant professor at the University of Calgary, and I'm going to provide just a few opening remarks here before I turn it over to our knowledge keepers. So here with me, who you'll hear shortly, again, we have Audrey Weasel Traveler, who is from Piikani, and Treffery Deerfoot from both Siksika and Kainai. So in recent years, Indigenous and allied scholars have been advocating for more of a decolonized or decolonial approach, sometimes called anti-colonial approach to sport history, which is an area that I'm in. So this decolonial approach would go beyond simply including underrepresented stories into the narrative of mainstream or modern history. So that is what we are trying to do here. So some of the formatting is not perfect, but we get the idea. Deerfoot, whose Blackfoot name was Apikais, many Calgarians will have at least a passing familiarity with him, even if they're not aware of the particulars of his life and legacy. He's etched on the city's cultural landscape, right, as the namesake of one of the main thoroughfares, Deerfoot Trail. This is, in fact, how I found myself connected to his story and eventually to Audrey and Treffery. I just moved to the city and I noticed this somewhat unusual name, Deerfoot. And as Audrey pointed out to me earlier this week, not only the road, right, but also there's a shopping complex, there's a hotel. So there are many different iterations or variations of how Deerfoot is appearing on the city's landscape. So for such a prominent place in the city's iconography, there was curiously little I could find about the man himself. What I could find took a rather negative view of Deerfoot's legacy, calling him a broken man. Knowing how historically Indigenous peoples have been misrepresented in especially mainstream accounts, I went to Siksika and sought out some of Deerfoot's descendants and community members. As I would learn, this mainstream or colonial perspective was vastly different from how he is remembered in his community, as well as the ongoing relevancy of his legacy today. Yes, so there's the trail, Deerfoot Trail. So a brief overview of some of the key aspects of what made Deerfoot famous in non-Indigenous society at the time. He was, now a moment to say here that he was a messenger pre-colonization. So he had an important role in his community that will be elaborated upon. But in early Calgary, he excelled in the sport of long-distance running, called pedestrianism at the time. And there's some key points listed here. As a contextualizing remark, I have remarks, but I don't really think remarks is even the right word. something essential that we have to keep in mind about the time period, I'll say, during Deerfoot's lifetime, he straddled two eras, right? He had traditional life, the way it had been known for thousands of years, and then the abrupt, near extinction level event of colonization. So he and his people experienced starvation, disease, the demise of the buffalo, combined with forced relocation onto reserves, in addition to other colonial policies. Deerfoot was in fact betrayed by the gambling syndicate that sponsored his races. From there, things began to unravel even further. In 1889, he was arrested after being caught stealing 2 blankets from a settler's home. Remarkably, the crime had actually occurred 2 years earlier. He had managed to evade the Northwest Mounted Police for close to 2 years through the assistance of fellow Blackfoot, who concealed him throughout southern Alberta and into Montana. And Deerfoot had ongoing entanglements with the Northwest Mounted Police until dying of tuberculosis in the guardhouse here in 1897. I'm going to pass the story on to Audrey from here. Thank you.
Okay. As a First Nation storyteller, I refer to Deerfoot as a grounding cultural hero who walked and ran and lived on the lands where myself and my relatives were born and raised in. Deerfoot contributes to a collective identity for thousands of First Nations people who will continue to do so for generations to come. My people's sense of purpose and pride in our identity are furthered by the accomplishments and fame of Deerfoot. He is an inspiration whose legacy inspires others to achieve greatness. A foundational value that Deerfoot modeled was constantly challenging himself to do better. Deerfoot ran like the wind. I imagine each of his running competitions was an opportunity to run faster than the previous one. Deerfoot's legacy is valuable to my people because we collectively identify with him. Being one of our role models, he preserves our cultural belief system and upholds our cultural inheritance. Our youth are told and retold stories of such heroes and heroines who modeled daring, stamina, and power. Our youth learn from their ancestors and are encouraged to challenge themselves, to set the bar higher for their own skill development and sense of self. One of the pictures there, the pictures there are of youth, historic and current. I always want to say when we see pictures of the residential school, we had what we called dress-up day. And so sometimes they dressed us up and posed us. And when they were really nice little clothes with bows in our hair, once the photographer left, they were taken off, and we never saw those clothes again. I am a third-generation residential school student. Okay, so the picture shows the dancers, younger and older. And so this is the pride that we teach our children to have. And we have a dance competition that's called Iron Man and Iron Woman, aptly named, because they're very challenging to each of the gender categories. And I feel that when those dances occur in other races and Indian relay, I feel the spirit of Deerfoot continues to shine through these competitions. And with that, I'll move it to Treffery.
Okay, gitkhana eksamatsi puanka utako. Nisonikoka essikutuyumaka nuhtista pitapiniksi pitohpikiks aamu. Mokitoikus aamu mohkins saamsi nittai tepuutsiksimska. Ogmi tsookstuts binan spitsi. Annimen tsookki kahpina kennimen tsapipuutus saamimsi. Tohkani puututsia. Nitsitapiiko. Me stakis anime testuimspinna. Okei, anime nitsitapiimiksi anime ikakätsinekäsiänste. Ogdepipia piipui. Good afternoon, my name is Treffery Deerfoot. I come by way of the Eagle Rips clan. Right here in this area where these two rivers congregate is where my relatives used to camp. Before there's even one building here, before there's even one fort here. And we stayed here. Our clan was called Eagle Ribs. And because when the group your clan gets bigger, we broke off and we went to Spitsi, or what we presently call High River. And it was there that my people flourished within those areas, and they talk about, they don't have monuments in the ground, iron pin. This is where they talked about the rivers, they talked about the berries that we ate, they talked about the buffalo jumps. These were the markers of our territory, and our winter camping ground was the Banff corridor, and you could hear resonance of in the mountains, in the cave and basin you might have seen where the hot spring comes. These were all natural remedies that our people used. Now I have to pay $10 to go in and enjoy it. But I take a great pride. As a little young boy, I was subject to the residential school, and it was at that residential school I was able to feel the oppression, the colonialism, the structure that they wanted me to take the Indian out of the child. And I know we're celebrating truth and reconciliation. And right here, I lift my hand up. I see a counselor 2 times a month. I'm healing a 9, 10-year-old boy. I'm healing a young man that was abused and saw abuse, and now I'm trying to do this so that these beautiful people, these are my son and my grandchildren and myself, who I'm trying to represent, that they do not have to know that their grandpa was abused physically and sexually. I can stand and be proud. Be proud of where I come from and the people I come from. So now we go back in history. I was in the military. It was very easy for me to go from residential school and then go into the military. It was both structured. It was something I knew, something I was comfortable with, and I excelled. I became a second lieutenant within the military. And I got out of there because of some more colonial stuff happening, and I left there. And coming out of there, I was spending time with my father, and my father says, he says, your grandfather wants to see you. And as a little boy, this man is Ed Yellow Old Woman. He was a chuck wagon driver at the Calgary Stampede. His name is in the record books for steer decorating, which is kind of a form of bulldogging, but they would put a ring on the horn on the steer. They didn't throw it down like they do today. And he excelled in a wild horse race with John Spotted Eagle those names are all registered within the Calgary Stampede records. But this man that used to come up here to King Eddie and the St. Louis and drink with Ralph Klein. Hello, Ralphie. You know, and you know, my grandfather had a lot of people that, because he came up here every day and caught the bus back home every day to Siksika, to his trailer. And then when he got hit on the road because he was coming home from being up here one night, and it gets dark pretty quick in the wintering months. He got hit, and they left him there. Some people brought him to the hospital, and he ended up going to the nursing home. We have a nursing home in Siksika. And he asked my father for me to come over, and I just got out of the army. And he says, okay, you know, here's my dad that doesn't take orders from anybody, but now his father's telling him, light that smudge, sing that song. And then that old man is telling me about his accomplishments. And then he says, I've been waiting a long time, and I want you to take this. And he pushed me into that new name. That is how my childhood name was Holy Calling in Between. It's a Sanskrit. My adult name at 25 years old, just coming out of the army, my dad gave me Deerfoot, my grandfather, who was raised by Deerfoot. So now we start talking about Deerfoot and who he was. Deerfoot was exposed to all of the elements of that time. Here's a man that had 14 children and 4 wives, and all of his children dying from a pandemic that they had nothing for my people at the time with the smallpox. They didn't know how to deal with this illness. This man became very angry because all of his children were dying of a disease he did not know. He also was very athletic, and his childhood name was Apikais, bad dry meat. When he was a young boy, he always loved to chew his dry meat and put it down and grab it again, you know, like all normal kids. All normal kids do. That was his childhood name. When you achieve status in the societies, you know, you're given another name or an accomplishment. My grandfather had a picture of him by that bronze statue at Deerfoot Mall and the Deerfoot Trail, and he asked me to do something about that and take it his name. So in 1990, under the leadership of Al Dewar, I dedicated the Deerfoot Trail to the city. In good faith, good understanding, did not get any financial compensation. I just wanted to make things right. That next year, I dedicated the Deerfoot statue, that same statue that he was a picture of my grandfather and him. I was able to dedicate, and today you'll see my name on that statue at the bottom, dedicating that to good understanding, good faith, that they used the image and the name of Deerfoot for that establishment. There's a number of establishments. I continuously work with the Deerfoot Inn Casino. I have 4 scholarships there. I've got a total of 14 scholarships, and more than half of those I have nothing to do with anymore, because I think it's important that we plant seeds. We plant seeds and let them flourish. Let them flourish. That's like what we do with all of our children. We raise them, we feed them, and we hope that they turn out in a good way. And that was my thought in developing these scholarships. They're under the Deerfoot name, and that's my contribution to help back. I would have never made it through school if I didn't play sports. I played sports. I got a football scholarship, and both of my sons got football scholarships. So those are the legacy of what Deerfoot done. I think when we paint a picture, we need to talk about first voice. First voice is somebody telling about the achievement. But first voice, if that's your grandpa, you can tell the story because you knew what happened. Deerfoot was a regular man. The media painted a picture of him because no Indian was going to be successful. Colonial way is to down. Let's not let these Indians get ahead. Let's not them advance. I have land. Deerfoot's got land in Bridgeland. I should go chase after that. Free rent, guys. No, no, I think it's important that some way we'll hear the results of that. I haven't pursued it, but it's there, written in black and white. But I think as we move forward, this man was misused. And I think that we can change things. We can change things. I think we have a lot of people from every part of the world here. I work and welcome new immigrants here. I got a Lieutenant Governor Award last year for working with the black people, the ethnic people. This design right here, this on my head cover is the design of Deerfoot. I had 3 teepees out here this week when you had the celebration outdoors, and this design is no more. I mean, this design lives on, but the bear design, no more red bear. No more red bear. They killed it off the train because they were killing the buffalo. Who was eating the buffalo that they just took the hide and the tongue? The red bears. It's like a polar bear out here in the prairie. And now, no more red bear. But when we put the teepee up out here, sang a song. It's still alive. The spirit's still alive. It might not be in this world, but the spirit is still here. Eh? So the big thing about what I'm trying to do is correct the story, correct history. You know, tell the truth. Let's not just one-side the story about there wasn't very good stories, and sorry for some of the people. I know there's a story, the book that's written about him, but this is why I decided to write this book, because my dad preliminary started it, and one of the people that we iconically recognized this week wrote a book, but again, it didn't tell the truth. This week is about truth and reconciliation. Let's find the truth, eh? Let's find the truth together. Let's let authenticity and first voice speak, and that's why we're here today. So I hope that you enjoyed our presentation, and along with my colleagues, I'm so proud of them that we're working hard together to make things right. Truth and reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we'll open up the floor to questions.
Sorry, I didn't quite follow it. So are you writing a book about Deerfoot?
3 of us here.
Oh, all 3 of you. And what's the status of it?
We are, well, the plan right now, though this may shift depending on, I always defer to the elders, right? But our present plan is to first publish it as start off with a long article in one of the sport history journals, and also an article for the public, in a magazine or perhaps a newspaper, and build out into a book from there.
And so what's the timeline? When is the article going to be released?
Let's see. Great question. I would hope, just thinking about academic articles, timelines, optimistically next year, I'll say.
Oh, great.
Thank you for your interest.
Yeah.
Is it known where Deerfoot is buried?
I'll just say, I'll say, how about I give the colonial and then you give... I'm joking a little bit there, but it's really not a laughing matter. I had understood from the records that I could find, admittedly incomplete, that he was buried somewhere here or near to here in a pauper's grave. That was what I understood from the records I could find, the newspaper, and the Northwest Mounted Police. However,
okay. Nachsania muitsa momusukoya mustoma stastomachkai. This road that goes right downtown. My grandfather told me that's where he was buried. But they exhumed his body and they brought it. He now rests in Nose Hill. There's old grave site out there, and so that's his final resting. But he was originally put here, but they needed progress to put this road to connect to the downtown era. This was the era of big establishment here, and so that's how, and the reason why they moved this body, because we come from what I mentioned before, the Eagle Rips clan, and later on the runaway buffalo. But we nomadically followed the animals, Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for both of those great presentations. My question is for Kirk, and I found it interesting how he's being put into conversation with settler artists. And I wonder if you could speak more to, what would it look like if we could put him into conversation with Indigenous artists? I mean, I liked your social history reading, but if you could just expand on that as well.
Well, I think that there's, as I alluded to, a very long and impressive history of Blackfoot, in particular, image making that continues to the present day with great artists like Faye Heavyshield and others. And I think that where Tailfeathers sits in that pantheon is not my story to tell. And I'd love to know more and explore more and ask knowledge keepers for their view on that. The story I can tell is where his art was embraced, and to a limited degree by settler art institutions, and the way it was treated often as illustration rather than a fine art work. And so I guess I'll have to, that's not answering your question, Nancy, but that's because I'm not the person that can answer it.
Will the book and articles delve into the story of the exploitation, the misuse that was part of Deerfoot's experience? And is it possible to name names of who was involved in that gambling syndicate and the greater context of where money flowed and who benefited and who lost?
That's a really good question. I think we've got my relative here, Audrey, wrote her thesis on Deerfoot. So there's been a lot of research and then a lot of approaching family members to get this journal together to represent her thesis. My good colleague here has also spent extensive time researching the book of Hugh Dempsey, other articles, newspaper articles. I think it would be only appropriate to include those, but also I think we want to speak about first voice. I think precedence has always been given to the knowledge keepers who have documented. How I'd like to see this book is I have some buffalo robes of Deerfoot. I have some other robes that speak to, the Pac-Man guy. Looks like the one that Pac-Man is chasing, the furry little guy. Well, we have images that come up of that many times in these robes. That little guy is the smallpox guy. And I was just blown away when they showed a picture of the COVID bug. Looks similar to that guy. Wow. Like many legs, around that thing, So that's, I would say that's history repeating itself. And we as people, we do our winter counts where we watch things repeatedly. When the moon and the sun are doing their eclipse things, different events happen in our history. We need to speak to that so that we know when we have to do something to prepare ourselves for what is coming again. So I think I'd like to say we want to get the book up before Santa gets here, but the thing is, we have to make sure that we're talking truth and reconciliation. We got to get it right, guys. We have to learn from history so that when we're representing this, that our children know what it's all about. And that healing is happening. I'm healing this 9-10-year-old boy. We need to get it right.
I'm curious, I thought I heard that you said his grave was exhumed and relocated to Nose Hill. Okay, I got that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So is there any documentation on that? Like, where was the grave? It's just like one question. Where was the grave? I know you said the road, but...
Right here, where the highway goes through here.
9th Avenue?
Right there, yeah.
Okay.
So when you drive through there, he kind of jumps in and gets off.
I'm with you. I'm with you. The spirit. I'm with you 100%. But where in Nose Hill was he relocated? Like, Nose Hill is huge.
Yeah, it's huge. Some people have identified it, and me, I haven't had the purpose to go and look for it. Just now I do, Now I do. But, in our way, it just is, in our native way. It just is. We accept things. My grandfather told me this story. It just is. You know what I mean? Why do I want to tell my grandfather and say, no, that wasn't right? My grandfather was right. Was your grandfather honest with you? Was it the truth? That's what we got to ask ourselves,
Yeah, I mean, no, I understand that, 100%. And part of the due diligence and understanding the whole story and getting the truth, I mean, I'd be interested in finding out, where his grave was. And has anybody verified that?
Jeez, you bring the shovel, we'll go look. Maybe we'll find some jewels there, some necklaces, yeah.
So, Dr. Niergarth, is any of Gerald Tailfeathers' history or practices taught, as you know, in any art history classes, either at Mount Royal or at U of C or anywhere, AU Arts? Do you know if he is taught at all in art history here?
At Mount Royal, we have a specific Indigenous Studies course on Indigenous art practice and art making. And I was very fortunate to visit that class and share some of this material with those students and with my colleague. And outside of Mount Royal, I couldn't tell you. I went looking for Tailfeathers in any surveys of Canadian art. Mm-hmm. And the only place I could find him was in a chapter that Ruth Phillips wrote in this collection, and it's the chapter that is for Indigenous art specifically, and he gets a little mention. But I would say, there's at a certain point, maybe I'll just say this, and I know we're short of time.
That's okay.
At a certain point, he was really tired of being called Canada's most famous Indian painter.
Yeah.
And he says at one time, I just want my art to stand on its own.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've really fully credited his work for the standing that it deserves.
Yeah, I that's kind of where I was going with that too. Yeah, thank you for that. And then my second question is for Audrey or for Treffery. So I heard a story, Audrey, I think it was actually from Leonard, about Deerfoot. So he obviously pays attention to the work that you're doing. Leonard is Audrey's husband. He spoke about Deerfoot actually being treated quite poorly from the Northwest Mounted Police here at Fort Calgary and being tested by racing, and was always won the races. And do you know if it has, I had only heard that story once before, and I thought that was really interesting. And Leonard sort of said, hey, you might want to look into this about some of the history here. Can you speak to that at all and share some of that connection about this area?
Well, maybe I'll start it off by who went to university, who went to college, who hung out with the buddies, who went out and you got a little crazy. Maybe let's steal some blankets. We got a lot of blankets at home, got buffalo robes, but let's just steal these blankets here, just for the hell of it, eh? And then we get so far and we throw them away, eh? Not our favorite color. So Deerfoot did some things, and and he was chased all over because they didn't want the Indians to be doing this kind of things to the new settlers here. There had to be a way to, especially a public figure, let's use him as an example. So they chased him, and they couldn't catch him. And there's a part there that the Mounties came to him, and he's sitting there in front of the teepee. And you guys saw that big knife that he has. The guy, he grabbed the tail around the horse, and he's slicing that guy's uniform in the back. And then he let him go, and they all rode away. And then his son, his name is Vince, Yellow Old Woman. His medal, Yellow Old Woman who went to war. His medals is not a special constable, but a regular constable with a red surge. His medals are in Glenbow. He went and got his dad. He went and got Deerfoot drunk. One of his wives, his name was Sun Bear woman, just west of where the present day Buffalo Jump is. Went there, and he was hiding out, and the son went and got him. Bought a big bottle of whiskey, and they sat there and they drank. And then when he was drunk, he tied him up and he brought him in. Who would do that to their dad? Because he knew they would not take him in alive. He brought his own dad in. So those kind of stories need to be told. The references have to be good. I'm sorry I kind of talked about our party days. Let it out of the hat. But, that's what happens. We're all kids. We all have, some things are not told, And we have to fill in the blanks, guys. And that's what I said, truth. We need to speak truths. And in that, reconciliation, the things we understand, hey, we're all the same. Hey, we're all the same. Thank you.
So when Deerfoot was running, he had a promoter, he had an agent, and he was running competitively, not against his own Blackfoot people. He was running against other nationalities because that was very competitive at the time. You know, field days, sports days, betting. That was what was happening, and so his promoter, and he was fast, okay? Deerfoot was fast. And people, his competitors, the other people that were lined up beside him, they didn't really like to be beat by him. And so there was a couple of instances where they tried to do things that would make, kind of say, well, he won't win this race. If, for instance, because he ran in barefooted sometimes, or if he ran with like moccasins, that was our natural way of being, my ancestors, not the running shoe or the jogging shoe of the day. And so what they did in his runway right there where he was going to run, they put broken glass.
Oh.
And so there was little things that were saying, like, if I'm going to be running and I flew all the way here, or I traveled all the way from New York to run against this Indian, I'm going to win. And all of my people that brought me here, make sure I win. Okay? So those things were happening. And even at one point, so when they did the broken glass, he still won. And then another time, they gave him alcohol before the run. And he still won. So, of course, there were things that were not, in good sportsman-like, favor. That happened. That happened to him. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all again. Let's give them a hand.